What happened after The Lord of the Rings? Once Aragorn is king and the ring-bearers have sailed west, what did Tolkien actually tell us about the Fourth Age of Middle-earth? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover Tolkien's legendarium in depth, as well as other great fantasy worlds like A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher. Welcome. The Fourth Age of Middle-earth starts with the fall of Sauron and the destruction of the One Ring, basically when the main story of The Lord of the Rings ends. And everything has changed. Sauron's empire falls, Aragorn is king, Elrond, Galadriel and Gandalf leave Middle-earth, the aging leaders of the Last Age, Theoden, Denethor, Dain, are dead. It's a new start of sorts. So what did happen after The Lord of the Rings? Let's start with the hobbits. After the scouring of the Shire, Sam married Rosie, and they had 13 children all told. Eleanor, Frodo, Rose, Merry, Pippin, Goldilocks, Hamfast, Daisy, Primrose, Bilbo, Ruby, Robin and Tolman. After Frodo sailed from the Grey Havens, Sam and his family moved into Bag End. He also inherited the Red Book of Westmarch, in which the legendarium of Middle-earth and the stories of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were first preserved. After he also left for the Undying Lands, he passed it on to his daughter Eleanor, and it was then passed down generation to generation, which is how we eventually got the story. Although I'm sure he remained humble to the last, Sam became a rather important person in the Shire. He replanted the Shire after the devastation of Sharky's reign with the soil given him by Galadriel. Where the party tree had been, he planted the silver nut, which grew into a huge malorn tree. In recognition of this, he was given the honorific name Gardener, by which his descendants were known throughout the ages. And Sam himself became Mayor of the Shire, elected for 7 successive 7-year terms. When his beloved wife Rosie died, he was still full of life. He had been a ring-bearer too, remember, but wearied of life without her and his beloved Mr. Frodo. He sailed to the Undying Lands himself at the age of 102 to be reunited with Frodo there. After Merry's decisive involvement in the uprising against Sharky and the ruffians, he, rather wonderfully, became known as Merry the Magnificent, and like Sam, quickly took up a position of responsibility among the hobbits, becoming Master of Buckland. He married and also added quite a lot to the Red Book, with tomes on herblore, language and history. After Frodo and Sam had both sailed from the Grey Havens, however, and his wife had died, he quit the Shire with Pippin to head to Rohan. Pippin himself had become Thane of the Shire, basically head of their military such as it was, and collected a library of historical information on the wider world for the benefit of the Shire. When he and Merry left the Shire, leaving everything to their sons, Pippin was 94. The two of them stayed with King Eomer until he died, then on to Gondor, where they both eventually passed away after long and eventful lives. When Aragorn died, their bodies were buried beside his in perpetuity, a place of great honour. The hobbits more broadly prospered into the Fourth Age as far as we know. Aragorn formally extended the Shire to include Buckland to the east and as far as the Tower Hills to the west, and it's through the Hobbit's Red Book of Westmarch that we know so much of what we know about Middle-earth. I'm sure the march of technology eventually overtook them, but Aragorn guaranteed their protection and independence throughout his reign. The Shire was kept for the hobbits. For the elves, though, the story was very different. Galadriel had predicted as much when Frodo passed through Lothlorien. For with the end of the One Ring, her ring, which had been preserving and protecting Lothlorien all this time, would also lose its power. Elrond's ring too. She said to Frodo, "Do you not see now wherefore your coming is to us as the footsteps of doom? For if you fail, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten." That is exactly what happened. Over the course of the next century, most elves, including all those we know by name, took ships and sailed west from the Grey Havens until the last ship, built by Círdan, carried himself and Celeborn and the last of the High Elves into the Undying Lands. By the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Rivendell and Lothlorien had both given themselves over once more to nature. Some elves did choose to stay in Middle-earth, deep in places like the Woodland Realm and to the far east, but they grew scarcer and more secretive than ever, and eventually faded away entirely. The Ents never did find the Entwives, and slowly they too faded, becoming more and more like the trees they shepherded. Other magical beings, like the dragons, seem to also have dwindled with the end of Sauron, diminishing and passing into legend. The orcs were also wiped out. Many of those closest to and under the control of Sauron did not even survive the fall of the Black Tower. As we read in The Return of the King after the ring was destroyed, "So the creatures of Sauron, orc or troll or beast spell-enslaved, ran hither and thither mindless, and some slew themselves, or cast themselves in pits, or fled wailing back to hide in holes and dark, lightless places, far from hope. Those that didn't were rounded up and put to the sword by Aragorn and his generals in the years that followed. Some who were further away and less under Sauron's control did survive for a time, but eventually all of Sauron's dark forces faded and left Middle-earth. With the end of the Balrog and Smaug and the diminishing of the orcs, the dwarves finally had the opportunity to reclaim the lands that were once theirs, and even to expand out into new areas. The colony of Durin's folk that settled in Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, continued to thrive, living in peace and friendship with the humans of Dale and the surrounding areas. Gimli had been based there, but led a group away to the Glittering Caves, those caverns he had discovered behind Helm's Deep. Some time after the year 171 of the Fourth Age, King Durin VII finally retook Moria, where it is said that his descendants remained until the world grew old and the dwarves failed and the days of Durin's race were ended. So the dwarves stayed in Middle-earth and prospered, and delved deeper and deeper into the earth, mining and crafting and eventually themselves becoming legends. I like that ending for them. Legolas and Gimli, we should say, grew ever closer as friends, and through them the ancient enmity between the races was brought to an end, just as the elves were leaving Middle-earth. As Gimli himself grew old, it is said that he joined Legolas in a final journey westwards, the only dwarf ever to sail to Valinor. His admittance there was, some say, a special dispensation by Galadriel herself for her champion. What was left with all these races diminishing and leaving was humanity, what became known as the Dominion of Man. Aragorn, as we know, was crowned king of the newly reunited kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. He reigned as King Elessar, with Arwen beside him as queen, for 122 years. He achieved a lot in that time. Minas Tirith was rebuilt with the help of Gimli and the dwarves and some elves. He formalised the peace and friendship with Rohan, who were then ruled by Eomer. We've already mentioned how he extended the borders of the Shire and also formalised its status as a free land under the protection of the crown, and forbade big people from entering it. He did something similar with the Druidan forest, making it a free land, and retitled Faramir the Steward of Gondor, Prince of Ithilien. Any orcs remaining in or on the borders of his realm were ruthlessly hunted down. In short, he took all the steps necessary to secure the prosperous and safe future of the whole realm. He even magnanimously gave Mordor to his defeated foes, including the former slaves of Nirn, now a freed people, who had been forced to work to feed Sauron's forces. We know less about what happened further east into Rhûn and south into Harad, though we can guess. Sauron's influence and that of Morgoth before him, which had lasted millennia, was gone, so slowly the shadow would lift. Not entirely. Tolkien mentions, for example, that the Blue Wizards, who were based in the East, fell and may have founded dark magic cults and traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron. And I'm sure there were other dark marks on the land. But there is no reason to believe that in the long run they wouldn't have prospered and developed like Gondor and Rohan. At which point, it's worth taking a moment to note quite how apocalyptic and far-reaching these changes are in the span of just a few years. The leadership of Gondor, Dale, Rohan and Erebor changed. The elves who had been in Middle-earth for millennia left. The dwarves slowly disappeared. Magical beasts were no longer part of the landscape, and Sauron, who had threatened the free peoples of Middle-earth for centuries, was no more. Just as importantly, those who had opposed him for just as long, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel and so on, were also gone. Everything changed. What was once a rich, magical land with elves, dwarves, dragons, wizards, and every other staple of high fantasy you could imagine, slowly became a land where humans ruled and magic became rarer. The changes at the start of the Fourth Age were massive, but they had also been coming for a long time. The elves had, one by one or in small groups, been leaving the continent for centuries. The dragons had been waning. The Ents had been slowing down. The downfall of Sauron, the war that led to it, and the end of the Age of the Rings just hastened what was already inevitable. Aragorn's reign, which ushered in these changes, was succeeded by his son Eldarion, who in turn ruled for a century. Prophecy suggests that after him, his realm lasted 100 generations until a new age brought in again new things. From that line came the kings of many realms in long days after. Some remnants of the magical history of Middle-earth surely survived in secret for long ages. Radagast, living in nature, the spirits of the elves who stayed in Middle-earth haunting the forests they loved. The magical heirlooms passed from generation to generation, but eventually they too faded. And after all that, well, we don't know much about what happened after all that. Tolkien did not write any further into the history of Middle-earth, other than talking in passing about the future ages of the world. I did a video on that if you're interested. But we know that he viewed Middle-earth as being this world, our world, but, in his words, in a different stage of imagination. Not a different age or era, Tolkien was very clear on that, but a different stage of imagination, created mythology, like Midgard in Norse mythology. In fact, Midgard can itself be translated into English as Middle-earth. So after that stage of imagination had gone, perhaps then we come into our own time of myths and legends. Or perhaps it's best not to think of the end of the Fourth Age as linear at all. It just recedes into mist, like the last ship from the Grey Havens, slowly merged into the sunset. If you'd like to see more videos on the world of J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.